Hello, hello, welcome everyone. We are so happy to see you on what is hopefully a warmish July day. As always, we're going to give our friends a couple minutes to find their way here. So if you haven't already, please grab your snack pack, your sweet tea, your kombucha, your fifth cup of coffee, even though you said 2 weeks ago that you were going to be quitting for the summer, whatever you need to be fully here, because this panel today is going to just, it's what we need. It's what we need after the week that we had last week. So get your needs met, do what you need, pick your nose, clean your ears to come onto screen so that we can look upon your beautiful faces as we arrive into these spaces. And we will get started in just a couple of moments. So housekeeping, remember that captions, you can access them at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Find something that says closed caption, and you can enable those so that you have a live caption running through the show. And live ASL interpretation is being provided by Pro Bono ASL. You see Gregorio already co-hosting with me, and that's going to be available throughout today's episode. Our community guidelines, if you haven't already read them and this is your first time here, I encourage you to take a moment now and check those out. They should have been in the registration process. It's just a reminder that in this space, we are allowing ourselves to have dissenting ideas, allowing ourselves to hold multiple truths at one time, allowing ourselves to avoid binary or either or thinking and instead embrace plus and, yes, and multiple truths on a spectrum. And there is a way that we go about that discourse that we hope you will, as much as you take away all of the information from this panel, that you will also take away the ways that we engage in these discussions. We're going to be recording this session. It might already be recording. Just a reminder that unless I have you up on the virtual couch, you are not going to be in the recording. I'm so sorry. I know some of you like brushed your hair and it's perfect and you got the perfect center split today. It's not going to make the recording. Just those up on the virtual stage are going to make the recording. If you come up and ask a question and come off of mute and come onto video, then you will be in that recording, but otherwise you're allowed to show your face while we're speaking and still avoid going into our archive. After this session, you're going to want to do some beautiful reflecting. Please take a moment and fill out our survey. Let us know how we're doing, how we could be serving your needs better. And definitely check out the post-workshop email that will go out to you with a whole bunch of resources that come out of the minds of these beautiful panelists, as well as other resources that we might spackle in to continue your unlearning on this topic. We have some upcoming live workshops on Sojourn that you're definitely going to want to check out. We're talking about measuring culture change on Friday, the July 14th. We do not just do DEI work without any measurement and analysis. Otherwise, it's just a really great lunch that we had, and we had a discussion. We're making sure that our efforts are being measured, being evaluated. We're using that data to then inform and pivot where necessary. Naisha is going to be talking about DEI hiring and culture change. Definitely want to check that one out. Now is the time to start thinking about your budgets. Or if you're on a June 30 cycle, you're definitely thinking about your budget and how you're going to implement over that next financial year. Naisha is going to take you through all the things you need to be thinking about when it comes to DEI hiring, especially in the face of our new hand down from the Supreme Court last week. So new information there that you are definitely not going to want to miss. How to respond to criticism as an ally. Joy's going to be taking you through that. They are really going to be helping you understand the role of an ally, which is not to be perfect, which is not to get pats on our backs, but rather to come alongside communities. And that requires sometimes getting tough feedback. And how you respond to that is in as much as the role that you are hoping to perform an ally, a deep aspect of that allyship work. Our partners today are Pro Bono ASL, Gregorio is here, Tim Mills is here. If you are wanting to do something really revolutionary in your DEI work, it would be to expand access to all of your meetings, to your discussions, to every virtual stage that you're going to be on, in person or in these virtual spaces. Think about including ASL in that process. After this session, you're going to go, hey, Linz, I really want to be doing some great DEI work at my organization. And we'll go, oh, we thought you'd never ask. Yes, I'll marry you. Strategic DEI consulting, workplace learning and development, executive coaching, full suite DEI inclusive organizational design, supporting HR leaders and executive leaders. That's what we do through our consulting arm at LTHJ Global, and we would love to have you. But if you can't afford that consulting price tag, then Sojourn is probably the path for you. It has all the clear step-by-step DEI journeys, the strategic plans and task tracking. It has support from a DEI transformation manager like myself right at the other end, but at an affordable price for smaller and mid-sized organizations. So there is no end to the possibilities, and there's definitely a solution that hits your budget. So definitely check those out if you haven't already. Let's begin the way that we want to end. Now that we've found our way here, let's take a deep breath. Let's take a deep inhale in. Let's take a deep exhale out. Releasing all of the distractions that would keep us from being present here in this moment. Challenging ourselves to practice the liberatory act of being fully here. Let's enter into the practice. Check out this panel. Not only are they beautiful and we just want to stare at their faces, this panel is super, super smart, and I've just been waiting all month to speak to them. First up on the virtual couch, we have Dana Racklin, who Dana is, most recently featured in the New York Times, Brownsville Safety Alliance, and one of the founders and serves in the role of executive director of We Build the Block, co-founded with the late actor Michael K. Williams, may he rest in peace, and Hot 97's Shanae Culture. We Build the Block aids communities facing over-policing, mass incarceration, and gun violence by co-creating new infrastructure and protocols. Dana was recently named chair of the Judiciary Committee for the Kings County Democrats. And in this capacity, she is able to formalize and expand a process that centers community education and engagement in judicial endorsement. This has recently been featured in Politico, and we really encourage you to check out those articles. Welcome, Dana, to the virtual couch. It is such a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, thank you. Super happy to be here.
Thank you. Let us meet Captain Derby St. Fort. Captain Derby St. Fort is a native New Yorker with over 18 years in law enforcement. He began his career as a police officer with the New York City Police Department in 2005, and has since risen to the executive level, serving as a commanding officer of the 61st Precinct of Brooklyn. Captain St. Fort, or Derby, as he has given us permission to call him today, is a proponent of alternative crime reduction strategies rooted in public health, and has demonstrated success by creating innovative approaches to address community concerns through collaboration with community-based organizations, service providers, city agencies, and institutions. Derby, it is such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited and happy to take part in this. So yes, let's do it.
It's going to be a great time. And let us meet Josh Ho. Josh Ho was formerly incarcerated and has been a policy analyst, a social media and messaging consultant, and organizer, and is the host and creator of the Decarceration Nation podcast, now in its 6th season. Josh, where can we find that? Tell us now.
Pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. They're all the major players.
Awesome. Everybody take a note right now. You're going to want to come back to that. Josh has a background in public speaking, debate, and public policy research. He holds a master's degree in international relations and is a former National College debate champion, 1990. So that tells me we will not be getting into any debates with Josh today. A longtime college debate coach. Today, as we said, he serves as the policy manager at dream.org, an organization we've recently begun collaborating with. So many amazing things coming out of dream.org. Josh has been featured for his keen insights into policy reform by outlets including the ACLU, Center for American Progress, Off Kilter Podcast, Politico Magazine, and more. Josh, such a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Let us delve right in, friends. As always, we want to start with the obvious slash not so obvious question, which is, Jay, when you get a moment, can you add Derby and Dana to the spotlight up here on the couch for us? What do we mean when we say tough on crime? I mean, I remember growing up in the 80s, and this was definitely something that was just on the news all the time. It was like the Heinz commercial and some sort of news thing about how we're going to get tough on crime. Derby, what is that?
I mean, just good afternoon, everyone. Again, just very grateful to be here and excited about this conversation. But just going into what we think about tough on crime, you know, being from New York City, I think of like, the war on drugs, the 80s and 90s. And this like overly punitive way to address issues that were centered on public health, was centered on just the well-being of communities. But I think of the 80s and 90s where maybe there wasn't so much knowledge of those things. But as a New Yorker growing up, just recognizing how prevalent drugs were in the community, and I think about a very highlighted homicide of an officer, Edward Burns in Jamaica, Queens, where, I live nearby. And I remember how that impacted just society. And it was this, where elected officials and politicians were, declaring this war on drugs and this tough policing approach because of not understanding how public health could impact public safety. So this tough on crime approach is basically has been really detrimental for communities of color, where we haven't developed the skills, as a society to address public health needs. And like, there's more knowledge of this now, and there's no excuse not to understand public health and see the correlation between public health and public safety. But yeah, that tough on crime was, to me, a result of that war on drug era.
But Dana, isn't it just like, you're criminals, you're doing drugs. We are a tough love society. We are, far be it from a turn the other cheek. We're like, you hurt me, I hurt you. Isn't that what we're supposed to do when we're addressing crime? Isn't it just kind of black or white? You have crime, you are tough. Should we care about people's mental health?
I actually think that we're asking the wrong question here, because we're automatically assuming that crimes are being committed. And tough on crime is a political stance and a dog whistle to make people who are not in neighborhoods that are traditionally excluded and under-resourced feel like there's an enemy that lurks right around the corner. And if we don't do these things, it will be in your backyard. And so we need to also roll back. What is the crime? because what we're seeing is criminalization of people and communities rather than addressing public safety or public health. So who defines what crime is? And so like in New York, we have a police department that is traditionally run by a small group of individuals that are politically appointed or connected, that have they themselves participated in egregious crimes, but yet are then making determinations about what crime is in communities that, again, are entrenched in poverty and, constant over policing and surveillance. So the first part is deciding what is a crime, because gathering is not a crime. Drinking alcohol when you're 21 or older is not a crime. Jaywalking is not a crime. Littering is not a crime in other communities. But when we think about tough on crime, and I'll speak only for New York because that's where I am and that's where our work is focused, those things become criminalized, and then we are tough on the people that do that. So I want us to be really mindful of the language that we use, because we're not talking about actual crime. And what we're talking about is a way to continue to marginalize and criminalize particular communities. And I just want to add that there's a difference between lawfulness and legitimacy. And if we are not legitimate, how are we going to be lawful? And those things are interconnected. And I really want us as a society to start having that conversation, because I'm in meetings with, city officials and all these different folks from different places. And it's like their idea of crime and community is from Law and Order SVU. It's not real. It's not real. If you're not in community, you don't understand it. And then also, if you are in these communities, you are being barraged with ideas about how safety is achieved and what needs to be done, even though the reality that you experience every day is different. So it's not tough on crime, it's tough on people. And we're not even talking about real crimes, because when you talk about impact or war on drugs stuff, you're talking about literally, and Derby can attest to this, young people getting arrested for jaywalking, for littering, for spitting, for gathering. This is not real. So I want us to be clear, in my opinion, this is not legitimate and it's not real. Nor does it do anything to address safety or public health.
Can I just add something? Even how we phrase tough on crime, for me, it's not even really that tough, because it's really just the most superficial or the easiest way to what we think is the easiest way to address things, and that's through punitive strategies, overly punitive strategies and punitive solutions. When we think about alternative things that can be done, it usually takes more an effort as in society, and as when we look at institutions and agencies, it takes more an effort. It takes more of an effort, and also to even build infrastructure, and how to provide support for communities. But we tend to really just rely on what we've been doing. All right, and I think when we say tough on crime, it will be even if we were define that as being tough on crime is actually digging deep into what actually is happening, addressing the core issues of communities. I think that's tough. And if we were tough on crime and tough on public safety, we would really consider actually helping people and empowering communities. But we haven't been doing that as far as law enforcement and far as society in general.
And I don't want to jump on the moderation, but I did want to expand on something that Dana said earlier. What we've seen in place after place after place is the place where crime is happening the most tends not to support tough on crime solutions, while the places where crime isn't happening tend to overwhelmingly support what are called tough on crime solutions. You know, it started in New York with Kathy Hochul. At the time, Lee Zeldin was attacking her unbelievably on being weak on crime, which is kind of ironic to a lot of us. But anyway, the end result of that was the places most impacted by crime in New York voted overwhelmingly for Hochul and against Zeldin, and were the margin of victory for her to win her election. In Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, the same thing happened, whether it be Larry Krasner, whether it be the senator's race, whether it be the governor's race. All of those things played out the same way. You can look at heat maps and they'll tell you the exact same thing. In Chicago recently, the exact same thing happened. There was massive belief that the tough on crime candidate was going to win. All the places most impacted by crime voted for Johnson, not for the tough on crime candidate. And so in place after place after place, despite the political and media narrative being that tough on crime is what people want, where the crime occurs, that is not what people want. What people want is different answers that make more sense to them because they've lived through decades of tough on crime and they know it doesn't work.
Exactly. And I just want to add to that, just working in a community in New York City and neighborhoods like Brownsville, where, you know, like gentleman just said, that they've been impacted by violence and tough on crime strategies historically. There is these sentiments in these communities that we want alternative things. And you think about the work that Dana is doing with the Brownsville Safety Alliance and things like that, where the community is asking for resources and asking for the police department to do things differently or redefine their role as it pertains to public safety. There's a lot of these sentiments within community. So as he's, you know, what was just said about communities who have been historically impacted by these issues, they are asking for different approaches.
Dana, such as?
I think, again, I don't want to be the person that's kind of exploding the conversation, but
Either person.
people a lot of times don't even know what they want because our realm of possibility is so limited by the 5 o'clock news and the barrage of messaging and cultural messaging that we've gotten over lifetimes around what is crime and how do you achieve it. And so, like, you know, we do an activity with young people where we say, like, build your dream school. And, you know, it's so hard to even see them think about, you know, maybe there would be a community garden or an entrepreneur's hub because they just see that schools look like how they look like, right? And so I think that the first step to thinking about alternatives is to expand the realm of possibility of what we can achieve. And then we need to build infrastructure around those things. And in order to build infrastructure, to take something from a programmatic initiative or an idea, it really does require the combination of political will and support, funding, and then getting media attention that validates it and making everybody feel like they're winning. Because at the end of the day, crime, quote unquote crime, is political. And so I think that we need to always keep that in mind. And again, what Josh had said about, like, the communities not impacted by crime are the ones making decisions for communities that are. I would also, again, insert here that the crimes that are being made that there's arrest for, like shootings, the outcomes for that by the NYPD are like dismal. Like, it'll be 21% clearance rates. So they're not actually even addressing the crime. What they are doing is they're addressing the quote unquote crime that we see in white communities all the time, right? Gathering, drinking outside, smoking, using drugs, all of that is happening in well-resourced, safe communities. And then in communities where you are seeing higher rates of violence, community violence that stems from, you know, years of state violence and trauma and whatnot, that's not what they're addressing. They're not catching people that, and at all. We know that. We could see that in the clearance rates. What they are addressing is smoking weed, gathering outside, having an open container. So again, we're not even, it's when you unpack it, it's not real. This is an imaginary thing that we have all come to believe through the cultural, social conditioning around the marginalization and over policing and criminalization of Black and brown communities. And so like, we have to hold tight with that. Now, when we do expand the realm of possibility, which is only because we have partners like Captain Derby St. Fort, we had Inspector Terrell Anderson, we had elected officials that were on board, we had willing participants in the community. Here's the other thing, like, don't think this is just a state problem. This is a community organization problem. This is the philanthropic industrial complex problem. When people are getting huge, huge contracts to deliver on public safety, and we don't see them, and they're not delivering because they want to be on panels and they want to be on Instagram and they want to talk about it, when the work happens on the ground, and it takes a long time. It takes years. It takes so much investment. It takes hours and hours. It took me 100 hours to get a 15-year-old in foster care that was kicked out of his foster home into a bed. And I can call commissioners. It took 100 hours, but we want to hire a case manager for $22,000 a year to do that. Come on, it's not realistic. So we also have to manage up to our CBOs that are getting lots and lots of money and not delivering. They're not paying their staff well. They're not training their staff well. They're not allowing their staff to actually execute on their scope of work. And then we need to come together and say, what do we do? How do we build something? So what we've done in Brownsville, what we've done with Captain St. Fort is we've built protocols and things that allow us to expand the realm of possibility of public safety. However, to institutionalize those things, we need to jump up a step. And I don't know how we get there. I'll keep wrapping New York Times articles around stuff until we get the things that we need. But that's really what the challenge is. There's a ton of infrastructure to take somebody who's homeless and addicted to a substance, shoplifting from Rite Aid to arraignments and then to Rikers Island. But there's absolutely no infrastructure that takes that person to shelter or supportive housing and substance use support. And that's the hard work. And all of us who are in roles of power, we're not all stakeholders. Some of us are power holders and others are stakeholders. Power holders need to stop saying, well, this person just didn't want help. They didn't want to take the opportunity. No, we're not doing something right here. And so we need to dig deeper into that.
This is Lindsey. Let's just take a deep breath, because I know that everybody else who is listening in today, like me, is like, I just learned 5 million new things, and I'm going to be trying to digest them for the next 6 weeks, and therefore we'll be watching this recording over and over and over again. I mean, all the way from we're not tough on crime to we're tough on people, to the ways that even within the communities, we are seeing that there is a decided pushback to say, no, we've tried tough on crime, and it's just been a negative impact on our communities again and again and again. This is not the solution. And to have Derby here, Captain Derby here, from within that system saying, we need to reimagine the system in a plethora of new ways, and Dana reinforcing that, calling us on the limits of our imagination as it pertains definitely to this topic, but to all of the adjacent topics. Like, come on, y'all, tell us in the chat window, am I the only one who is just reeling here? Wow.
I also add just one more point here to what you just said, and I think this is also important, is if communities and CBOs, community-based organizations, like the work and feel more invested into this like community response to crime and public health responses to crime, then they also have to be willing to wade the torrential downpour that comes when somebody like a Captain St. Fort rattles the system. And it's really, really difficult. I mean, an example outside of policing is like the work that I do with judges. As soon as a judge, particularly Black judges, particularly Black female judges, decide to use discretion and maybe not issue bail or use, supervised release, they end up on the cover of the New York Post. And then that sends a message to all the other judges, beware, you will end up on the cover of the New York Post. And then all the other judges are timid and the defense legal aid is like, I'm not gonna say anything because I don't want it to impact my other clients. And everybody's like this. And so what happens? We just stay in the same cycle, because instead of us going out and storming the streets in defense of that judge for using the discretion correctly and enacting bail laws correctly, we all sit back and say, oh God, I feel bad. I know that happened. No. Why do we have to wait for a murder? Why do we have to wait for a hashtag? We need somebody else to die in Rikers Island to come to the defense of the judge who did the right thing. And the same thing goes with somebody like Derby St. Fort, where it's like, there's a really clear reason he's not in charge of the police department or elevated, right? And where is everybody in that? And how do we rally around people who are trying to rattle systems in ways to deliver? We cannot wait for hashtags and horrible incidents. We need to step in now in defense of people that are trying to deliver for us.
Oh, we cannot wait for hashtags. This is Lindsey. Derby, what has that experience been like, trying to change the system from within? Has it been unicorns and rainbows?
I mean, and this goes to what this conversation is about, being truly tough on crime. I mean, when it comes to finding, new ways of doing things, that's truly tough. And there's a whole system designed to prevent things from, from us to imagine how public safety could be. When we talk about industries and career or professions, I mean, you talk about law enforcement. Law enforcement is almost the only profession who says, let's go back. When we talk about other professions, it's about evolving. Let's go to the new phase. When we talk about law enforcement, it's like, how do we go back to the 90s, tough on crime? And, and that's very interesting, where we continue to go back and back to, you're talking about what is almost 30, 40 years. All right. But let's have the conversation on how do we move forward. And then when we do have those conversations about moving forward, there's these blocks and hurdles and the system is designed to prevent people with voices who are about moving forward, about empowering communities, especially communities of color, underserved communities, where there's this history of marginalization and like poverty and gun violence. I was a young cop, as a young cop, I was assigned to Brownsville in 2005. And I came back to Brownsville in 2019, and Brownsville was still Brownsville. And that really shocked me, So again, I don't know what's the excuse where we're not, where communities are like stuck. All right. Then we have to think about policing, and we have to think about what are the efforts we're doing in society. Why do we have communities that are stuck in these positions where, 10, 15 years are going by and it's still the same issues? That's our fault as society. We got to come to terms with that, and we have to do better. We have to do better for young people. We have to do better. And there's no excuse now, because when we talk about the 80s and 90s, there may have been a lack of knowledge as far as what can be done. All right, we understand what public safety is. There's knowledge behind this. So in 2023, we shouldn't have these conversations about rolling things back, knowing the outcomes, right? We know the outcomes of communities of color. Like what is the argument? We already seen this happen. And it's very frustrating, it's very frustrating. The path is so clear to me. It's so clear. And it's not, I'm not even like saying anything radical as far as like this issue of public safety and addressing trauma in young people and Black kids. Like, is it a problem to to provide therapy, you know, to be penalized in the NYPD for providing therapy for young kids is disheartening. It's disheartening that even as a Black Haitian man that want to do that, that I have to go through these hurdles, but I'm willing to do that. And if there's anybody listening that's, you know, who really don't understand the obstacles, I'm telling you, these obstacles are there, you know, and it's very unfortunate in 2023. And I thought we were at a different place in society, you know. So, and I'm very optimistic with that. So these experiences has really come to my surprise, unfortunately, because I thought we were at a different place in society. But we will continue to push forward, and you know, for anybody on this call, and I think there's a lot of people that are advocating for alternative strategies, who want to see things progress, who want to see communities evolve and become empowered, and, you know, just see young people, you know, be who they truly should be, right? I've seen young kids who have this vast amount of talent, and because of like these obstacles, they become like a shell of themselves, and that's not acceptable in 2023. There should be a pathway for young people to expand and to be who they're supposed to be. And I want that to happen, and I think, and that should happen, and there's no excuse in 2023 for that not to happen.
This is Lindsey. Josh, who benefits from the status quo, or as Derby said, things even regressing even further backwards? When we think of the origin of policing, at least in the context of the United States of America, which really grew out of capturing those individuals that were trying to escape enslavement. What can you help us understand? What is the thinking of, no, let's stick with the status quo? Who was that serving?
This is Josh. You know, I think it's kind of a combination of factors. I think to some extent, you know, there is a very large profit motive for in certain parts of this, you know, and it's not necessarily conspiratorial. And that's the part I want to talk about. If you've built a gigantic bureaucracy of policing, and that gigantic bureaucracy of policing continues to get billion-dollar budgets in major cities every single year, you're going to try to continue that because you're trying to keep a lot of people employed. You're trying to do a lot of things. You've also been told for 50 years that this is the correct way to make things happen. And everybody buys into that at some level because that's how they make their living. I don't think it's necessarily conspiratorial, but that is why they have media departments inside police departments. That is why they have all these things, is to continue to make sure that the money keeps coming to their enterprise. You know, you also have people who are true believers. I think, you know, a lot of times, like prosecutors across the country, a lot of them really believe, despite the fact that they have no expertise in criminology, they don't know anything about reentry, they don't know anything about how to rehabilitate people. They believe, because they've been told all the way through, that if you punish people and give them long sentences, that means we'll have better outcomes. There's no evidence of that, but that's what they believe. And they've believed it for years and years and years. And you can even understand why, because so many of them see only the worst of people every single day. If you go to court every day and you're a prosecutor, you're seeing someone who is being accused of something terrible. You believe that they've done something. You don't see people who come back and succeed. You see people who came back and failed. And so you buy into this and you continue it and you continue it and continue it, and it becomes passed on, and it's everyone in your office. And so you have things like that. If you work in a prison, you want money to come to prison, so I don't think it's a conspiracy where there's a bunch of people who get together in a small room and say, here's how we're going to keep. I think the one exception to that is the prison profiteering folks, the people who the companies that profit off of people in prisons. I think that is a little bit conspiratorial, but the rest of it, I think, is just because we've built this system. We think this system's going to work. Everyone who works in the system is invested in the continuation of that system, because that's where they get their meaning and their life from, just like all of us who work. So I try not to think of it as people being ill-intentioned, although that clearly is the case sometimes, and we'll hopefully talk about that a little bit more. But I do think overall, it's kind of like what I would call an accidental conspiracy. It's a conspiracy of interest, not a conspiracy of ideas or collaboration, if that makes sense.
Josh, can you just expand for a moment? Because I guarantee there's somebody on this call who, in reading your bio, had to confront their own bias, right? Of, oh, well, in my organization, we would automatically screen out somebody who had a history of experiencing the incarceration system. Before we get to the larger system, what is that own personal work we need to be doing to confront the way that we have been conditioned? We have been biased to believe that people are either good or they're bad, or this very either or thinking, and the ways that we think about employment, the ways that we think about opportunities, the ways that even in that language, somebody who has experienced the criminal justice system versus somebody who, I can't even think of the old language. I've trained myself out of that language. Can you, dream.org deals a lot with this in helping organizations that are trying to advance justice tech. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, this is Josh. So 80% of the people who work in my division at dream.org are formerly incarcerated. And, I think all of us, if we get together, and when we do get together and have conversations, I think all of us are extremely accountable and try every day to, through our work, make amends for the harms we've created in society. I don't think any of us feel like, whatever got us incarcerated made us, we're something we're proud of or something we're happy about or something. The whole point of what we're doing is to try to make the system better. I don't know of anyone, and I mean anyone that I talk to who's come back from incarceration and is involved in the work, wants violence around them. Most of us lived through incredible violence, both before we were incarcerated and when we were incarcerated. And I don't want to do, a lot of people go through and tell crazy stories. I call that prison porn. That's not really what I'm trying to do. But we have seen things that make, in my whole life, if I never see another act of violence, and I'm sure I will at some point, but if I never do, it'll be the happiest. I want public safety. I want public safety in every neighborhood. I want every child to feel safe. I want every parent to feel safe. I want every person walking the street to feel safe. And so I can't, on the one hand, I understand that people have all these prejudices build up and that they have investment in these ideas. And I can't do anything about that. And, if someone wants to shun me or say I'm not or whatever, that's okay. I accept that. A lot of people have been victims of crime and they have certain feelings and that's the way they feel. But what I'd like to hold up is that I also am a victim of crime multiple times when I was younger. So it's not, again, you talked about binaries. It's not a binary. Almost everyone I know who is incarcerated or is back from incarceration also was a victim of crime or was a witness to crime as a child or, has seen, trauma. It's been in trauma throughout their whole life. That doesn't make it okay to do what they did, but it is part of the story of why these things happen. And the more we get to healing trauma, the better we're going to do at reducing crime. And so think about me, whatever you want. And if you don't want to hang out with me, I understand entirely. And, that I actually do understand and accept that. But we do have to, at the core of the work I do, believe that people can change and believe in redemption and believe that in that process, there is accountability and amends.
This is Lindsay. Dana, do we, within the context of the United States of America, let's just stay here today, do we have a criminal justice system that believes in redemption?
I don't even think that that's the question, because this whole thing is illegitimate, and like, we hold certain people accountable for things and other people don't have to be accountable for things. And what is redemption and who decides it? And that's like another part of the narrative. I was in court with a young man today in our program, and even just listening to him talk about whether or not he deserves a second chance. And of course, we are bringing the DA's office to task to do what we call problem-solving justice outcomes, because it's not okay to talk in these theoreticals about reform and being progressive DAs, but rather, what does that look like? I don't need you to table at my back to school drive. I need you to come up with outcomes that keep us all safe, including him. And oftentimes the folks that are in court are the most unsafe people that we know. And so the other thing is not really about redemption. For me, it's also about breaking this lie and cultural thing that we tell ourselves around, sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
Breaking the lie, breaking the cultural story we tell ourselves.
Oh, that we're also doing everything that we're doing because there are victims. And I hear this all the time from different people, whether they're perpetrators of harm, whether they're state actors like police and DAs, regular community members, but there are victims. Well, I am a victim of a violent crime. My partner died of a drug overdose, and the people who sold him the drugs are now about to be sentenced to a mandatory minimum. And I don't want any of those people to be in prison. I want them to not hurt anybody else, and I want them to be the best versions of themselves. But yet the state perpetuates a narrative that these people have to be held accountable, and they're doing it in the name of me or survivors and victims. And this is not real. And redemption to me does not look like the folks who sold the drugs to Michael going to prison. Redemption and accountability and justice looks like them getting healthy, looks like them understanding how they could be part of the solution as fentanyl overdoses soar in this country. Nobody's asking about the redemption of the Purdue pharmaceutical company. Nobody's saying, I mean, how? What should we do about accountability and redemption for Purdue while they sit on their yachts somewhere laughing because they're texting with Congress and prosecutors and, whatever? We only ask the question about redemption and accountability when it comes to those that we see as disposable and bad. And so I don't believe in America, where the country was built on crime, on violence, even this other conversation about guns and gun violence. You want me to tell the young people that we work with who are actually at risk of being harmed by guns that they don't have the constitutional right to defend themselves and their families, and they should not be posting their guns on social media, X, Y, and Z. However, we have elected officials and lawmakers and others who so freely do it, who send it out as their Christmas cards, who brag about it. So we need to be thinking about who are the power holders in this conversation, and where is the accountability and legitimacy and redemption for them? And how do we get there? Because until that conversation happens, the conversation about these folks is illegitimate. And we're never going to get to a solution if we're constantly focused on what the people with the least amount of power and access are doing. We need to be focused on the conversation about what the people with the most amount of power and access and money are doing. I really don't want to hear about, I'm going nuts thinking about this sentencing of Michael's dealers, because are you kidding me? They're They're the problem. Plus, they've been incarcerated since February 2022, and overdoses have continued to soar. So we have not done anything to keep the community safer. We have not addressed their substance use issue. We have not made Michael come back to life and me feel whole. So what is the point? And the point is that there are certain people that this is their legacy. Law enforcement and criminalization of communities is legacy. These folks see themselves as heroes, and they get to tell this and perpetuate this lie and story to their kids and to their community, and they live inside of that bubble. We cannot allow that anymore. We have to hold certain people accountable, and it's not the folks that are the lowest or the least powerful in the conversation. It's just not.
Wow. I just want to hold space. This is Lindsey, Dana, because I know this is, as you just said, it's very live right
Yeah,
now.
and also just like a lasting point about that is when they arrested the folks that sold Michael the drugs, who one of them is like 70 something years old. They both have substance use issues. They're non-white. I will never forget the barrage of text messages from people that are in the criminal justice reform space saying, congratulations, thank God, blah, blah. You missed the point of The Wire. You missed the point of Michael's life's work. You missed everything that Michael talked about. If you think that seeing these folks arrested in federal court, facing mandatory minimums, probably dying in prison, is a good thing. So again, we have to challenge our norms, our cultural, social norms, to even begin to address the criminal justice disaster that we're all currently living through and continue to live through. And like Derby said, we have way too much information to continue to believe that this is acceptable and that this is the path forward. And a last part, sorry. I often think about that my grief was constantly interrupted by law enforcement and the criminal justice process. So also thinking about the re-traumatization of families and communities when there is violence, when there is harm, when there is loss, and how the justice system that purports to be here to hold people accountable and, you know, bring about justice. You know, I'm not sure, I'm not speaking for everybody. I know that there are folks that believe differently than me, and that is okay. But I do want to acknowledge that there are people like me who don't want to see that.
Just take a moment, take a breath, everyone. Hold space for grief. Dana, as we were coming on here, we were doing our pre-show process, you made a joke about, you know, the prefixes that are ascribed to your name. It reminds me of, oh, now I can't think of the author of the quote, but anytime a woman acts like anything besides a doormat, she's immediately called a bitch. If anybody can think of the person who authored that quote, please drop it in the chat for us. But somebody is listening today who's like, I hear what you're saying. I want to reach for what you're saying. I want to figure it out. And there's somebody who's like, oh, everything Dana just said was, she's, you know, anti-police. She wants to just blow up the fucking police. And, you know, like, what about all those people who give their lives? And, you know, Derby, can you help us? Can you help us as a police officer yourself? Can you help us I don't
Yeah.
want to say soften, but maybe translate for that person who that's all they can hear. All they can
Yeah.
hear is Dana. Go ahead.
I've this is Derby. So I've worked, I do a lot of work with community orgs with people like Dana who have the similar sentiments. I mean, I think ultimately there's something within them that are asking for change in how we just support community, support young people. And then again, reiterating that there's too much knowledge out here for us to continue to do the same thing. And seeing young people engaged in violence, where we're seeing young people dying unnecessarily. And there are ways to intervene and ways to address this. There's a lot of alternative options out there. Even if you may have, we're talking about like people who have these conservative views and they're saying like, I don't believe in it. But there hasn't even been investment in just evaluation. Like we're just like flat out saying this doesn't work. Like there's simple things of like, you know what, let's look into this. It's not like there's a few voices asking for this. We're talking about a whole, there's a huge population of people who are asking for this work, for alternative strategies. So if we can just like, if people in positions of authority and power can just listen to those voices, and let's look into what else can be, before we just knock everything down, because there's this thing where we're not even trying to listen to communities, and specifically Black and brown communities. It's weird. You get so much support around this type of work, alternative work, where we're providing resources for young people. We're connecting them to health providers. We're addressing trauma. We're addressing really the core issues within them, and then we're seeing results. And it's like, you know what, we don't even want to deal with that. And it makes me believe that, unfortunately, it makes me like really think of like, the foundation of policing, where policing started from, and racism. Unfortunately, that's where I because there's no other. I don't see any other path of not even trying to be responsive to Black and brown communities. I don't see it. And me being an executive now in the NYPD, because as a young cop, you in policing and you wonder, why can't we do this stuff? Hey, maybe there's something else there. Oh, you know what? There's other things. Then as I move up, I'm a lieutenant now. Oh, what's wrong? Why aren't we doing this for community? Then I go into the captain rank and I'm like, the only blocks is us. What are the blocks? I'm not seeing the blocks because I'm doing it. I'm fortunate to be in a position where I can pilot stuff and demonstrate that it can be done. And what happens when I do that? There's this backlash. So I know what the problem is. So I know exactly what the problem is. But it's unfortunate because, again, this is 2023. We have so much Black and brown officers in powerful positions that can actually do what we can do. But there's this like fear that still resonates from the past. And we're still kind of like in this headlock where we're afraid to like move and shift what status quo is. And I think that's a big factor.
And just to say one thing about me being anti-police, because that's a favorite line of many folks. The only positive press that the NYPD has had, short of their 5 o'clock news hits with their favorite on-air TV personality doing some like, superficial thing, the only substantive good press the NYPD has had in the last few years has been in partnership with me and the protocols that we're doing. but that's not the kind of press they want. And so again, we need to unpack. We have different goals. So people like Derby and the other police commanders that we work with, they see winning as people being free and people being safe. If you're a traditional law enforcement person, you see winning as arrests and prosecution. Those are different goals. And if you have two different goals, the pathway to achieve those goals are of course different. So they can't achieve their goal by making referrals to community-based organizations when there's somebody arrested for, stealing at Rite Aid because they have a substance use issue. That doesn't help their goal. So we also have to really be very clear about what is the goal of policing versus what is the goal of public safety. Those are different things.
Everybody write that down. Write that down, because you're going to want to be asking yourself that question and taking that everywhere you go as you leave this space today. Say it first one more time, Dana. What is the goal of policing and what is the goal of public health?
Public safety.
Public safety.
Public health is public safety, but yeah.
Friends, we have a question from the audience here in community with us. Laura, did you want to come off of mute and ask your question directly, or did you want me to ask it on your behalf?
I'm not sure my Wi-Fi is good enough. If you could ask
Hear
it for
you.
me. Oh yeah.
Oh.
All right. Cool. My question was along the lines of what Dana was bringing up. What pathways exist right now, or that we could reasonably advocate for, to hold the people who are holding the keys, so to speak, to account? Because I felt like that was a really wonderful point. There are people already being impacted by the justice system who certainly, are having their crimes monitored, whatever those crimes may be. But how can we hold people to account who are not really being monitored by the current justice system? Or what could we advocate for that's already got some momentum behind it and seems achievable?
I mean, for me, I disagree with Josh. I do think that there's collusion, and I do believe that this is a coordinated effort. And so I can't even be in a headspace of thinking about, like, how am I going to hold these people accountable, from billionaires down to policymakers, down to chiefs. They're going to do what they're going to do. But I think what we can all do a better job of doing is holding the line. See, there's an eruption. George Floyd, there's an eruption. And everybody's outside and whatnot. And then what? Neely was murdered in the subway. There was an eruption. And then what? Nothing. How do we continuously hold the line? And part of that is, it's difficult to do because it's exhausting and it's traumatizing. And I get that. But in whatever which way you can hold the line after the eruption, that is what we should be doing. And we need to come off of social media to do it. This is not a problem that we could fix by, like, soapboxing.
Yes.
I'm telling you, you do not take a young person from crisis to stabilization by talking about how unfair the justice system is on Instagram. It does not happen that way. It will never happen that way. So I think what we have to be focused on is, what are we doing to hold the line after the eruption? And we're not doing that super well. We try to elect good folks, then they get in and they see the challenges. We're going to shop here. Like a great example is, there was a huge story in the Daily News about the uptick in summonses and CCRBs, which is complaints about police officers being abusive, and arrests and all this stuff. Where are all the people that were marching for Black lives? Go be observers in Brownsville on the weekends at nighttime. Be outside. Put your bodies outside, not in Times Square, not waiting for another murderer to go walk along Barclays. Go to Stone and Sutter, right now and put your bodies outside and challenge what is happening. Not be disruptive to community, not rant and rave and fight and create issues that you get to leave and then the community has to clean up. But think critically about what role you can play right now, knowing that despite everything that happened in 2020, Brownsville is experiencing 2 square miles is experiencing a 2,000% increase in summonses and arrests. And the CCRBs are twice as high as they have been at the highest they were 6 years ago. What do you do about that?
Dana, can you tell us what CCRB stands for?
It's a Civilian Complaint Review Board, which
Civilian
is,
Complaint Review Board.
you know, you can call 311 to make a complaint about a police officer's behavior, either as a witness or as a victim. So, I mean, and then also in our circles, like everybody has some point of access or entry. How are you holding people to account in your circles, right? So having challenging conversations with folks that, you know, you otherwise wouldn't, you might let things slide, or activating folks that you might have otherwise seen, oh, they're not really involved in this stuff. No, everybody's involved. Everybody's involved, right? Everybody pretends to be involved on social media. I need you to really be involved, and this is a pathway to do it. So I think that that's another thing. And thinking about also your subscriptions to news outlets. You know, right now, the New York Post determines policy around public safety. However, if you're subscribing to places like The City, like Hellgate, like WNYC, all of those places, you are then bolstering media that is telling real stories. So again, we have to be mindful of our everyday actions and how we participate in creating change after the eruption happens.
I just want to push back a slight bit because I agree with most of that. The one thing I disagree with is that you can actually use social media very effectively. I'm not saying it's always the case, but it certainly is the case. My background's in organizing too. An example in Michigan, you know, about 50 of us got together. The governor was not vaccinating people in our prisons. No other governors at the time really were. We got together. We organized a social media thing. I did trainings. We had people dying every single day for months in our prisons because of COVID. We trended nationally with just 50 people because of the organizing we'd done. And the very next day, the governor got a press conference question, and 5 hours after that, she started vaccinating people in prisons. I'm not saying it's entirely our fault, but it definitely was partially our fault. And I'm not saying that all social media activism works that way. You do still have to organize, but you can be pretty successful using social media in certain circumstances strategically. That's a hill I'll die on because I've done it time after time.
I'm happy for people to use social media. What I'm just saying is far too many people are in this space and they're not outside. And that is real. I mean, I have had this conversation with people that are doing work all the time. We cannot live on social media. That's a great example of one thing, you know, that created change. And then like, what's the next step on top of that? And so we have to keep building, and we cannot live in the space of social media, right? Like it's one component, I think. More fair way to say that.
I agree. It's one component, and traditional organizing is another. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Josh, in your from your vantage point, what is the work, following on with Laura's questions, that we can be doing to advocate if we want to move from this space today?
Well, I don't know if I have an answer to how to hold power accountable aside from to continue to demand that they change. And to do everything you can do to organize people and to change voting patterns, et cetera, whatever you need to do. If it means just the community refuses to participate in the things that government is trying to push down on you, that works too. Whatever it is, those solutions are fine. But I did want to hold up one thing, because in that question, she mentioned restorative mechanisms. And I want to talk just real quickly about a story. I don't want to be too specific because it's still ongoing. But in our community, or very close to where I live, there was a church. There was someone inside that church who embezzled a large amount of money. the church decided to live their own message and go and talk to both the prosecutor and the local dispute resolution area. They got together. They worked to come up with a plan to do restorative justice. The prosecutor is willing to go along with that. And in the end, the church got paid back a very large sum of money because they went through the alternative process. And I don't know of any situation where you go through traditional justice system and you get paid back or you get made whole. People are told that the way they're made whole is through incarceration and things like that, but that's not really what happens. And I think, very similar to what's happening with in New York with common justice and a lot of the other people, I think what we really need to do is start trying to do these things that investments, like Patrick Sharkey's a sociologist, he said a long time ago that it's not that you can't have success with some of these investments in traditional mechanisms. I think they haven't been successful for a number of reasons. I think Dana brought up a lot of them. But there's an opportunity cost. And that is that the opportunity cost of investing in all these things is you're not investing in the people in their own communities in solving problems, perhaps in more meaningful ways. And so I think we need to really just start doing what the captain suggested too, which is, really trying different things, because what we've been doing for 50 years does not work. If you believe in public safety, it's not making us safe. You see, as Dana said earlier, overdoses are going up, even though the laws against drugs are going up. And it's been that way as long as time. We've got to change the way we do these things. And if we don't, we're just not very smart.
Derby, question, I think 2 for you. How do we help shift institutions to measuring impact and changing or learning how to change their goals and metrics based on those measurements and analysis? And is there a possibility to change policing from the inside? Or is it challenging for officers of color or other representatives of historically excluded populations to affect change over time?
All right. This is Derby. So I'll answer the last part, and then we'll go into the other parts of the question. But as far as the challenges internally to change like perspectives within law enforcement as far as how we view policing, specifically policing communities of color, there's a huge challenge because there's this cultural thing that's embedded into the core of these agencies. And once you become, indoctrinated, you go to the academy, you get planted these seeds, and these seeds often just get watered by veteran officers who say things, and they kind of continue to grow these seeds. And before you know it, you have 5 to 10 years within the agency, and then you become just like everyone else. Mm-hmm. The awareness I've been privileged to receive is through the cultivation of community. So I'm a product of those community organizations, those activists, those advocates who saw something in me and they invested their time to educate me. But I was open-minded and I was able to receive. And through that, I was able to pretty much remove those old cultural things that I received, and I was able to implant new ways of thinking, which allowed me to be a vessel for the community. So I'm in here, I'm a vessel, I'm a true servant of the community, and I was cultivated by the community. So, and I'm thankful for that, to be someone who's a true servant in that way. How do you get other officers to go through that process? Is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult. So, and often and I see officers who tend to do things that are counterproductive to themselves and to community. But there's this understanding that I used to be that. So
Mm.
the grace that I have for that, because it takes it. I mean, was an enormous amount of investment in me by the community. So I understand that, but I really don't have the answers and how we just shift the culture and position offers to be seen as more of guardians instead of seeing themselves as like this opponent, and we're in this war against community. And I've heard these terms, especially during the protests. George Floyd is like this, us against them, and that's just not beneficial to to anyone in community. But I think there's an awareness that is happening amongst young officers. With that being said, there is an awareness. There's an officer that texted me in LinkedIn recently and said, "Listen, I want to be part of this program you're doing, how you integrate CBOs and community-based organizations to help address local concerns." So he's influenced about this new way of policing, and which I see it as really being tough on crime, because you're really digging deep into what's happening within communities. So I feel like these younger cops are seeing things differently, and it's important that community, although there's these, a lot of people have these sentiments that are like, they may seem anti-police, but if they realize the impact they can have on these young officers, if they invest in them the way they invested in me, like cultivate, plant seeds. Listen, you can be a true servant of community. You can be a vessel of community. You can be a guardian of community. But we need that. Officers need to hear these things, because it will motivate them to see themselves beyond what they are seeing culturally within law enforcement. I think that's the best advice I can give. But I know there's this thing where there's a lot of anti-police sentiments, but you have to realize that there are officers in there within policing that can be helpful in the true essence for community.
This is Lindsey. I feel like that's the perfect place for us to end today, to invite each of us to be a vessel within community, which in itself is an act of liberation, rejecting our dominant Western colonialism and the way that we've been cultured to excommunicate, to once you make a mistake, you're out. And that is a theme that we can think about unpacking throughout this entire conversation. But to be a vessel within a community, I think that is our charge that Derby, Dana, and Josh, you are inviting us to do within this work, and we thank you for it. Beloved, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for staying late, as there was absolutely no way I was going to stop these three from talking. And we know that this was a great panel because I barely had to say a thing and was just like, please just keep it going. New York in the house. All right. My dad is also from that part of Queens, and his father was a police captain. So thank you.
I am in Michigan, but I am originally from New York City. So.
All right. Where are we going to Pam's place to get some Jamaican later? What's up, y'all? Come on now. Okay. Thank you everyone for being here. What was said here stays here. What was taught and learned here leaves here. So take it out. Follow Josh and Dana and Derby online. We will share all of their resources with you in our follow-up email. As always, share the recording, expand the network, expand the community, continue the work. Goodbye.